una donna ungherese a cui do il tempo di avvicinarsi, una compagna innamorata del proprio marito, una madre, una nonna, una sociologa che ha fatto della sua vita un impegno per difendere il futuro, per difendere i diritti dell'infanzia. Presidente dal 2007 di Eurochild, è qui con noi Maria Herzog.
Allora, buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti. Vorrei iniziare la mia presentazione con una citazione di uno psicologo molto famosa, Alice Miller, che diceva: i nostri genitori, i nostri nonni non dovrebbero avere la colpa di averci dato
because at the time they had no better information at their disposal, how to raise children, what are their needs, but we do have them today. We can't claim innocence when the next generation blames us for having rejected information that was available to us and was easy to understand. So this means that we have a very severe task, as we have all the information, and I would like to talk about the details of it to you. Why children? Why am I interested the most in supporting children and their families to take good care of children and support those who are in need to get extra support? We all go through the one and only childhood, the most important phase of our life, the basis of our adulthood, and in many ways that is determining us. As it was said, children are the future, but they are also the present, as children themselves are stating very clearly, and their childhood is very precious, so we shouldn't just look at them as future assets, but also valuing them now for their being and ensuring their well-being. The childhood is the fastest development period in life, as human beings are born as very premature, very immature, fragile babies and need a lot of nurturing to develop compared to many other species. In 1986, as a young family sociologist, researcher interested in family issues, I was confronted with a situation when my later husband, who was one of my main supporters in my life, and who used to be the main chief doctor of a county around Budapest, where a lot of deprived people were living, asked me to help to find out how to support better those families living there and how to prevent infant mortality that used to be very high at a time. Then I was confronted in that county for the first time in my life that many, many thousands of children are living in institutions. They are deprived of family care. They are abandoned, neglected, abused. So since then, I have committed myself and devoted my life to support not only families and children in general, but with special focus on those who are deprived of their family life, placed out of the family. I don't know whether you are aware of the fact that today in Europe, the most developed part of the world, there are still 1.3 million children, approximately, living outside of their families, deprived of family care, 600,000 of them living in institutions, but these children are not orphaned. Only 2-3% of them are orphans. Most of them have been neglected, abandoned, left behind, and severely abused. So here we have a task, but obviously we don't only focus on children who are already deprived. We have to protect and support all children. The way we are taken care of, the way our rights, needs, and well-being is taken into consideration are not only influencing our own growth, but also our perception of the world. This is a model we will follow to take care or neglect others when we grow up, and the way we are behaving. So investing in children is the best investment, most profitable investment ever. Obviously, this means that we should focus on investing children much, much more. From economical point of view, though, the problem is that not only those gain, or not primarily those gain, who are investing the money. That is part of the issue also economists have to tackle together with us, social scientists, and with all of you. The last 2 decades have changed dramatically our perception of the developmental needs of very young children, partly as a consequence of the films and information aired following the Romanian political changes, when children in institutions were discovered, and many people could detect them on the television programs, all the devastating situation children were facing in those institutions in Romania, and of course in many other parts of the world that hasn't been discovered at a time. This also initiated a very intense research on brain development of children from birth, and the technology made it possible to detect the influence of emotional stimulation, nurturing, and it has proven the evidence that John Bowlby and many other psychologists already for decades, actually John Bowlby in the early 50s, detected that emotional attachment bonding is the most important food for the brain and for the child to develop. Neglected, abandoned children do not thrive properly, and certain areas of their brain does not develop properly. So perhaps those areas that are responsible for empathy, learning, and behavioral issues. That means that we are blaming later these children for not misbehaving, for not learning, for not being motivated, although it's not them, it's just the deprivation and the lack of proper development that is causing all these problems. So this is a double stigma on them. It is why it is so critical to support the future and new parents in any possible way to understand the developmental needs and steps of their children and provide them with all the support needed. Increasing parental knowledge and skills are paramount. Obviously, professionals should also know how to take good care of children, but we should take it granted that they are trained to do that, while parents are not. As parenting is not only based on instincts, we have to learn how to take good care of our children, as our instincts have been challenged by many ways. Obviously, throughout our socialization, all the impact of the environment, we can't say that we know by heart or by instinct how to be good enough parents of our children. On the other hand, though, parenting has become more and more complex and demanding, growing expectations towards parents without providing them the needed information and support. As Alice Miller said, now we have all the information, so we should find ways in which we can help not only parents, but also would-be parents, prospective parents, older children, in fact, how to know more about themselves, how to trust themselves, how to trust others, and become competent adults who can make good relationships and also become good parents. Many parents, however, even today feel ashamed to seek help or ask questions about their parenting difficulties or about the developmental needs of children, as there is a very false public notion that parenting skills are natural, everybody should be a good parent. I tried to show you a picture, if I find it. Look at these flowers. Which one do you like more? The orchids grow beautifully when the conditions are just right, and they dry out, sadly enough, when they aren't. And they are very sensitive, need special care, like many children. Dandelions, though, they are growing almost the same way in very different and very poor conditions, and they are much less sensitive. A lot of empirical evidence and research based on it suggests that children's development cannot simply be explained by either biological or contextual factors, but that their interaction is important to understand contributions to child behavior, and there are many, many variations. Some children are rather orchids, other more dandelions. But all of them are valuable, all of them deserve our respect, and all of them have to be supported to survive, develop, and thrive. Resilience is a universal capacity which allows a person, group, or community to prevent, minimize, or overcome the damaging effect of adversity. Building resilience is the ability to adapt well to hardship, crisis, trauma, tragedy, threats, and can help us that the children manage stress and feelings of anxiety, loneliness, uncertainty, sorrow, or grief. However, being resilient doesn't mean that one will not experience difficulties and stresses. The resilience means that the coping strategy is there, and that is making the difference. So I would like to show you the 7 C's of resilience, and I only hope, I guess, that in Italian the 7 C's are also working, as these are almost all Latin words, so it should work also in Italian. Competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. These are the main elements of resilience, and we have all these, and we can develop it in ourselves. And for children, then we can overcome many, many difficulties we would face otherwise. I would love to show you another picture. I call them the resilient ducks. You have to look at all these ducks as they are spending a lot of time nibbling their feathers, spreading oil over their layer, and that makes them waterproof, as you can see it. It keeps them warm all over, and they can swim in the water without any problem, and they never sink. This is a very, very important experience, because a number of research have identified specific protective factors, such as trusting relationships, emotional support outside the family, good self-estimation, encouragement of autonomy, integrity, hope, responsible risk-taking, a sense of being lovable, school achievement, belief in values, unconditional love for someone. The most important factor seems to be to find a reliable person in our life who we can trust and turn to for advice, help, who gives the needed security and safety for all of us. We all need that kind of security feeling. Even in very, very critical situations, in war zones, in cases of natural disasters, children suffering from severe previous traumas and painful experiences can be saved by a caring personal relationship with someone worth trusting. Key persons in life create resilience. Even very troubled situations can be healed. A relative, a teacher, a neighbor, a friend's parent, lover, someone who appreciates, value, respect, admires, encourages us. And this gives us the oily cover that you could see on the ducks. And I guess this is a very important picture. We always have to think of these ducks. How can they keep themselves warm and safe on the water and swim without any difficulty and enjoying others' company? This is what we have to achieve with children. I was a very troubled child for different reasons, and I turned out to be lucky, primarily, I guess, because I'm a dandelion child. My parents' family couldn't provide me the best upbringing, as they were very troubled themselves and never got any help from anyone to overcome their difficulties. Therefore, it is really easy for me to understand how hard it is for other children and families in crisis. And in my professional life, I'm really determined by the desire to help others and make it visible how support, understanding can make a difference and make the life situation, children's life, much, much better. Therefore, instead of doing anything else, as my basic education is in economics, so I could have become a banker, what I wouldn't prefer doing, although I value it. I wanted to understand rather how families are working, how children can be better protected, and this is how I have become a sociologist, researcher interested first in the dynamics of family, children's upbringing, and then more and more in child welfare and child protection. A neglected and abused child doesn't experience safety, permanency, affection, nurturing, and love. He or she cannot swim like the ducks, and they very often sink. So therefore, we have to do everything to prevent the abuse and neglect. A jigsaw puzzle child, as I will show it to you, hopefully. Yes. This jigsaw puzzle child, as my very dear friend and colleague Eileen Myers-Pastor created and showed to thousands of foster and adoptive parents in the Pride training program, is falling apart. It's a very good example to demonstrate that children have very different needs at different stages of their life, but also what we can see that children experiencing abuse, neglect are easily falling apart and show very disturbing signs of inadequate development. This child, who seemed to be 10 years old, according to his or her biological, chronological age, has got a body of a physical appearance like an 8 years old, emotional maturity like a 0 to 2 years old, an IQ for an 8 to 12 years old, an academic age of a preschooler, social age of 4 or 5, and sadly enough, life experiences of an 18 years old or older. So it must be very painful and disturbing not to match, not to fit, and as a consequence, often being excluded, discriminated against, as you can experience it in different stages. So why and how should any child who has been abused and neglected trust adults around them? In principle, families are the safest place and optimal for children, but some families are dangerous and damaging also. This is why we have to focus on the reform and of a new way of thinking about protecting and nurturing children from a very, very early age on. How can we build back this jigsaw puzzle child? Because this is the most important positive thing what we can experience once this child is starting recovering. He or she needs the ability to develop resilience, as I try to convince you, getting the needed support to do so. I've experienced a lot of this kind of support from people around me, and therefore I'm absolutely convinced that we have to provide to all children who are born, regardless of their background, very high quality universal services, not only to them but also their families, targeted support for those in need, including early childhood education and care, parenting programs, education in all forms, also out of school, informal ways of education. We should utilize the general knowledge of child development that has to be accompanied by personalized experiences, ownership, and empowerment. Even the most troubled families have got some strengths and resources. We have to enable them to discover and utilize their strengths and resources, especially because there are not so many, not enough professionals and services for them, so we have to work together with them and make them active participants of their own life, including children. In many countries, there are groups of vulnerable children and families and again excluded, discriminated against, and deprived of their rights. We all have duties, everybody, to protect them regardless of their nationality, ethnic belonging, or religion belief. It has happened, sadly, with many different nations, groups of people, minorities, and still people do not seem to learn from these devastating experiences. Genocide tragedies are happening, even recently and currently. Children, though, even in very harsh conditions, have got only one childhood, and we shouldn't forget that, and has the right to be provided with opportunities, access to healthcare, education, play, love, affection, attention. Through my personal experiences, I could detect that we can make very important corrections even in our own lives throughout our lifespan, regardless of our childhood experiences, if we get a chance. But we are also learning from our own mistakes. We can even cause harm to others, even to our beloved ones. We need to be very critical and self-reflective to overcome these difficulties, and if possible, staying stable and in harmony with ourselves, because that makes the world a better place also. I'm sure that my exceptional children made also their own corrections, as they are wonderful parents of my 5 grandchildren. I'm really proud of them, and I feel that we've done a good homework, but there is a lot to go for the next generations in all our lives. In all my activities as a researcher, as an educator, as an activist, a manager, a representative of different bodies, I'm representing the same values and principles to provide all human beings, including children, as they are also, of course, human beings, respect, rights, and equal opportunities. One of my heroes, János Korczak, who was born as Henrik Goldsmith, as this is his pen name, if I can get his picture. He was born in 1912. He was a very well-known pediatrician, writer, and pedagogue in Poland, where he was born and where he lived. He established an orphanage for very poor, abandoned, or neglected children, later 2 residential homes for Jewish children in Warsaw, which he ran like a republic, a true ideal democracy. It's still a wonderful model how to do that. The children had their own parliament, newspaper, and court. He was one of the authors and initiators of the Declaration of the Child, which was approved by the League of the Nations in 1924 already. What he said, respect and admiration goes to what is big, what takes up more room. Small stands for common and uninteresting. Little people, little wants, little joys, little sorrows. Korczak was incarcerated in the Warsaw Ghetto and decided not to leave the 200 children alone, but go them in Treblinka to the gas chambers. Hopefully we don't have to have the same example again in our lives.
Vieni Maria, vieni. Grazie per il tuo intervento, accomodati qui.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for your contribution. Please come here. So, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria. Can you hear? So, we start not from the concentration camp. Okay, spero di no. Let's start from children, and let's try to give them a government. So let's try to give children the opportunity to govern themselves. What does it mean? What we adults can learn from them? What can children learn from them, from being self-accountant, self-governed?
Honest, very transparent, very open, sometimes very rude, because we are not used to this kind of openness and honesty. But this is very helpful for us, adults, I guess, give us a very good reflection on our own reactions. And why I very strongly believe in peaceful conflict resolution, mediation, restorative justice. Actually, Korczak was a champion also, organizing a court within the orphanage, and he himself was also punished on many occasions by the children, for instance, eating chocolates when he decided not to, but couldn't stop doing it. And he was accepting the decision of the children, and this is exceptionally important, that we are serious when we are talking about child participation. It's not just tokenism. We are not using children, but we look at them as equal partners, and it pays off.
You were speaking about a negotiation. So you're speaking about a contract, an agreement. So what is the importance of establishing an agreement with children? What is the importance of pre-establish shared rules when this is possible with them for an adult? So why should adults accept to discuss with children at an equal basis, to discuss with children about shared rules?
Actually, I guess children are very competent. Even the newborns are very competent. They can express their needs very clearly, and they send us very clear messages. If we don't respect it and don't respond adequately, then children learn that their feelings are not important, and they are not important. So how can we expect them respecting us? So if we are starting from the first day of life, or even during the pregnancy when we are having a communication with our would-be child, how to proceed and reflecting on each other, then children are perfect partners from a very early age on. Also, this is helping the community and the society, because that means that we learn to feel empathy, we understand each other, we can express our own needs, our own feelings, but also paying attention on others. If we started from the first day of life, then obviously children grow into it, and then negotiation is a natural procedure. We are responsible as adults, though, for the well-being of children, so we shouldn't push the responsibility on them. It is our task to provide them with all the needed facilities and environment to develop properly, but we have to know what are the questions in which they are competent, and they should give us their reflection and answers. According to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, children should be heard in all matters affecting them and what is not affecting them.
Fantastico. Senti Maria.
Fantastic. So self-estimation, self-estimate. So you were speaking about that. So we live in a society which is so aggressive, so violent very often, also not careful to ourselves and to itself, because there was no care, there was no attention during the first years of life of children. So adults do not have a self-esteem, sufficient self-esteem. So adults do not have a critical capacity on themselves. So what can we do? And this would be the last question about children, because I would like to speak about the duties of being adult. What does being an adult mean? So what are the duties of adults? Not only towards children, but also towards themselves, to create the society, the environment, the contexts which facilitate and support the most appropriate situations for a better future. Now, about self-esteem, a little longer. So how is it possible to create synergies and structures with synergies, so that adults, not because a body has created a law, a rule, but just because there is something triggered in the adults, so that adults understand the relationships, the actions of this relationship with children. So how, because a structure can sculpt a child.
If we are learning that we are valuable and we value others, and that negotiation and non-violent communication is much more effective and efficient than attacking each other, then we can learn, that's part of our socialization, how to cope. I know that our genetic composition and many of the atavisms in us are challenging this procedure, but that's why we believe in culture, and that is why we believe in development, so that we can learn, and we can, for the next generation, we can even give more opportunities to thrive in this respect. I'm not naive, and I'm not believing that this is an easy exercise. There are many, many conflicts of interest. Many people would obviously jeopardize our efforts, but we have to try, and if we try together, it has to be successful.
Gli adulti.
Okay, conflicts of interest, you said, adults. So, all of us, we are like a coin with two sides. On one side, we have our Western culture, this industrial development and the Western civilization, and we focus on on successful men. able man, successful person, a person who makes money, who generates wealth and enjoys this wealth. And this has started a mechanism to be successful always. But clearly, this success mechanism is based on something archaic. So the need for protecting our space, ourselves. So this shows our need to impose ourselves on the others to ensure something for us. But in us, there is also this other aspect you are talking about. You are stressing the goodwill, the good sides of men, of humans, because every person feels, would like to receive affection and care from others. Every person would like to be loved, supported, considered. And probably this need makes this person understand through intelligence that also the other person would like to receive the same. And this, also the other person is entitled to receive this. The other person is entitled to receive care, understanding, careful communication. You were speaking about non-violent communication before. So in this society, how can we help adults to understand that the two sides of the coin are not in contrast one with the other, and that at the same time we may wish to achieve an important position in our life and society, but without losing sight of caring for the others and without avoiding us and preventing us from feeling the others, feeling that other people are like our neighbors, members of our families, part of us.
As far as I see, this is primarily an emotional issue and not a cognitive procedure. This is why it is so important that we are learning more about our brain functions, for instance, because that gives us the clear picture on how the emotions are driving us. But if children are not getting the needed attention and affection, they don't learn how to feel. So what you are experiencing very often in very hostile situations, when people are very aggressive, they want to ruin others or even the entire world, when they are very destructive, that they don't feel. There is this small part missing from their developed brain, so they can learn how to behave, they can learn how not to damage people. But this is why psychologists, psychiatrists are in a big trouble when they are facing those people who cannot be treated properly. So I guess what we have to do is approaching people also at an emotional level. And what we are experiencing in child protection, for instance, very often, that, as I said, even the most damaged families have got some resources, some kind of elements, traces of disability to develop. So what we have to do, we have to empower them, to give them the impression that they can do it and support them in whatever way we can. What we shouldn't do, taking the responsibility away from them, because this is what we can experience today very often, that we want to help children, and in my profession, in the helping profession, social work for instance, people are overdoing instead of helping people express their needs and only helping to supplement their basic abilities and power that is inside them.
In pedagogy for the third millennium, we call it the strategy of the 9 steps. So we say that the bigger step has contained the smaller step, approach it but never completely. So it has to approach it and reach it and stimulate reactions by giving the hand, but the other has to take his hand to stand up, to learn. So this is very nice to hear this from you. So in this theater, we have students from the University of Perugia, and 21 minutes always cares about learning to learn. So if you if you had to give us adults and these young people who are our near future, because in a moment they're going to get a degree, in a moment they're going to work, in a moment they will be fully responsible for their own lives, and so the responsibility for interacting with the world, because up to now the world has contained them, maybe helped them, supported them, but at least the world has pushed them. The world has given them opportunities. So, if you had to summarize just in a few words, tell them how should they keep working beyond their own strength, their own force. Why is it so important to do more?
As far as I see, the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child is a very relevant one. It's not only the family members who can help a child, but the entire community. And we should redefine the responsibilities of parents and the communities and obviously of the state to provide all the necessary support to every single child born and obviously every member of the society to develop their full potential, if possible. We all can do every day something in that. If we are feeling safe and we enjoy our lives, this is a great contribution. But I'm absolutely convinced, as I tried to say in this quote from the Talmud, that whoever saves their lives is saving the entire world. And if we are thinking of it every day, then we can do something, a tiny little thing to provide, to contribute, and then obviously we are not doing it for getting it back, but we for sure get it back, so the world will be a much better place to live in.
Grazie Maria.